Welcome to the Liquid Soapbox Podcast. This is a show where we talk about topics that we're passionate about, giving us an opportunity to get up on our soapbox with the help of a little bit of liquid fuel. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Liquid Soapbox Podcast. My name is Dominic Battistella. I'm your host. As always, joining me is my co-host, Clint Webb.
What up, what up?
And also we have Andre Cameron, who is our producer. We appreciate his hard work and efforts here on the Liquid Soapbox Podcast. Now, today we have a guest I have been very excited to speak to because I think he and I have a lot in common with some of the things he's gone through and some of the things that I'm going through currently and have been for the last 6 years. And that's Mr. Alex Falconi. He is the owner of the Proper Person YouTube channel, where he discusses high conflict child custody cases, and specifically his high conflict child custody case. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on, man. Thanks for being on. I think Dominic would be the president of your fan club at this point.
You've done a hell of a job.
Yeah,
and I just real quick introduce our viewers and our listeners to how you came to starting this podcast channel and what you've gone through in your life to make this all, just bring this into your life. I don't think this is anything you necessarily sought out, right?
No. So my name's Alex Falconi. I started the Proper Person channel mostly after my case was wrapped up and over with. What I mean by that is a termination of parental rights. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but I went through a high conflict child custody dispute. I'm not even sure the term existed back then. And what I like to start out with is explaining where I started and where I ended up. So I started with a 2-year-old. I had supervised visits and a temporary restraining order entered against me. And then I ended the case, as I mentioned, with termination of my ex's parental rights and my wife adopting my son. Throughout the ordeal, I went from supervised visits to unsupervised visits, from unsupervised visits to joint physical custody, from joint physical custody to primary physical custody, then to sole legal custody, then to suspending my ex's visitation rights, and then finally to the termination of parental rights. The case involved numerous corrections by the Supreme Court. And what I mean by that is the family court judges screwed up quite a few times. So the Supreme Court stepped in, overturned their decision 3 times for my family judges, and then 1 time for a different judge. So a total of 4 interventions by the Supreme Court. And then there was a special occasion where I had to file something called a petition for writ of mandamus, which is a little technical, but that actually published. So there's now a case named after me. And that's a case that allows parents to dispute the government's confidential address program for purported victims of domestic violence. So it's mainly the technical and legal aspects of my case that bring people to my channel, because they're actually trying to win their cases. And the one thing I wanted to mention is, for the most part, I didn't have an attorney. It was pretty rare that I had one. And then for my ex, go ahead.
How often did you have an attorney? Because I've been watching your My Docket series, which I've gotten to over 100 now, and there are over 200 so far videos currently published on your YouTube channel just in that video series. How often did you have an attorney?
So that is one of the best questions to ask, because accomplishing all of this stuff with an attorney doesn't really help that many people, because most people can't afford one. So I like to approximate that about 95% of the time I did not have an attorney.
Wow.
And for my ex, about 95% of the time she did have an attorney.
Wow.
So that is one of the problems that most parents face, is that high conflict child custody cases don't end. Unless you're a millionaire, you aren't going to be able to get through with an attorney. And
Right.
That's the help that I try to bring people, is to show how can you, do these things on your own? How can you win Supreme Court battles by yourself? Stuff like that.
Was she relying on you not having the money to continue that long, drawn-out process?
That's a great question, because on the one hand, yes, she did take advantage of that. But I think that if I did have an attorney, I actually would not have ended up with this outcome that I had today.
Right.
And that is because of the approach that attorneys take. And more likely than not, I would probably have joint or primary physical custody, maybe even sole legal custody. But the attorneys aren't quite as aggressive with the issues that come up in high conflict child custody cases as they probably should be. So ironically, if I was a millionaire, I probably wouldn't have ended up with a termination of parental rights like I did, in my case.
Yeah, it's not personal for them like it is.
The other thing
Right.
is there's a presumption amongst attorneys
Right.
that parents are reasonable people
Sure.
and
Right.
they should ultimately work things out, almost
Exactly.
like the judges believe the same thing. And if there are two parents that are in conflict, it's both parents that are at fault.
Right.
And the court is just not set up to deal with a situation where you have one reasonable parent and one parent who is completely unreasonable or has some kind of personality disorder.
They probably also like the win.
The
Put it in
attorneys
the win
certainly
column.
like
That's
the
what I'm
win.
saying. Put it in the win column. Yeah.
That's one thing I would actually disagree with. The court system is equipped to deal with the problem, but the attorneys and the judges, for lack of competence, don't deal with it correctly. So the system is capable of doing it, but you have to twist their arms to force them to do it, which people shouldn't have to do. Yeah. And that's because of the mentalities you described. You were correct that they just think people need to work it out. That wrong-headed approach is why the system is so messed up for high-conflict child custody
Well, the
cases.
thing is, it's going to be right for the vast majority of people who split
Exactly.
up that can co-parent,
Right.
and most of those parents are going to be able to be taken care of in the mediation process. At best, usually they can work out some sort of agreement and come to a stipulation on both sides as to what the child custody is going to look like, and they can co-parent in general and go to doctor's appointments and parent-teacher conferences and make decisions about where the children are going to go to school. But when you have
Those are
you know,
reasonable people.
Yeah, when you have somebody who has severe emotional problems or emotional immaturity or clinical narcissism, borderline personality disorder, it's hard to put a specific label on some of those things. You just know that you're in the fight for your life and your child is the one that you're fighting for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the mentality of the unreasonable parent is difficult for ordinary people to understand, because ordinary people are typically going to think, hey, they're thinking like me and they just disagree and they just need to work it out. They don't realize that a lot of those people are antisocial, and so they see it as a game. And they just see the rules as a system of rules to exploit. They don't really care about the child. That's a really unpopular thing to say. A lot of people like to say that all parents care about their children. It's not true. There are some that don't.
Some that are more
And-
vain than care about that.
There are some that flat don't care.
Yeah.
The one video, Alex, that I'll tell you that I've gotten to so far that it really enlightened me as to the mindset of your ex. And I know there was a lot of things that, and I'll talk about and converse with you about some of the commonalities between my ex and the deal that I'm going through and yours. But the one thing that hit me was when your son was in kindergarten and your ex was specifically sabotaging his ability to go to the charter school that you had him in and doing things in hopes that they would kick him out of school.
Wow.
Talk a little bit about that and what was your mindset dealing with that?
My mindset at that time, I think at that point I started to realize that she didn't care. And so that's why I dealt with it so effectively. Whereas before, I thought I just needed to explain it to her. So at that time, I realized she knows what's best for him and she just doesn't want to do it. And the biggest red flag to that is when I sent emails asking about the school. And I didn't get any responses at all for so long. I can't remember how long, but I got no responses. So I could have been like any other parent and I could have said, I guess she's fine with it and I'm just going to sign him up. But I knew better than that because of how the case had gone before. And I immediately knew that this is going to be set up for a situation where there's a conflict right at the last minute.
Sure.
So then I filed a motion. And once I filed a motion, all of a sudden, here comes an opposition with all these reasons as to why the school is a bad choice. So when somebody is arguing with you and then it leads to litigation, that's one thing. Because reasonable people sometimes have differences of agreement. Sure. But when somebody doesn't say anything, and they don't say anything, months pass, and then you file a motion, all of a sudden magically there's an opposition like that, that's a huge red flag, that this isn't a person that cares about their child, that they're just taking an opportunity to fight because they can.
Well, Zern, if I remember from the video, was that she was going to disagree with you when your child was already in the charter school, pull him and put him in another school, and now it ruins his opportunity to continue on in this charter school, which I guess at the time was number 2 in the state, and you wouldn't be able to get him back in because he got in because there was a lottery system, and then there was a preferential treatment for those children who are returning.
Exactly, and that's exactly what would have happened.
Yeah.
That's not 99% certainty. That's 100% certainty what would have happened. But what you described was guaranteed to have occurred in my case.
Sure, and that's why you filed your motion, at which you won. But it was after you filed your motion that you won, and your son was in the charter school that your wife started, or excuse me, not your wife, your ex started having him miss school, not sending him with the uniform, not sending him with the proper supplies, not communicating, causing a scene, all of these things to intentionally try to get him kicked out, doing an end around of the decision that the judge made. It's crazy. Sending him to that.
I talk about that in a video called The Cycle of Revenge.
Yeah.
Where you win your case and then they start pulling a bunch of stunts because they want revenge. And that's just them trying to settle open scores. Not just with you, but not just with the school, but with everyone. Yeah. With the judge, with the attorneys. It's just this terrible attitude. And yeah, you saw the video, so you know that it wasn't over when it was over. It keeps on going.
So I imagine that a lot of the people, you've got over 6,000 followers or subscribers on your YouTube channel. A lot of those individuals are people who are going through high conflict custody cases. Now, I don't know how to specifically describe this. You say reference emotionally immature people, and you don't. I haven't seen you necessarily give it a label as far as a particular personality disorder or something like that. At least so far as you have so much content, I haven't been able to go through all of it. But one of the things that I noticed that struck me personally is a lot of what you're going through or went through is almost verbatim the exact same pattern of what happened when I separated. So I was married, so I had more to the divorce than the child custody case and child support. I also had these other things going on, but the first thing that happened when I filed my separation documents, she immediately went to get an ex parte domestic violence protection order.
Standard
like clockwork. And
they go to a convention. People joke about that they all go to these conventions and they go through a training program.
It seems like it, right?
It does.
He's leaving me. It must be he's an abuser, or there's something defective about this person that's leaving me because nobody leaves me. I'm perfect.
I guess running back to the beginning where you said I didn't give a label to it, not initially, but I have now, and that's just high conflict child custody or a high conflict parent. And the reason why is I started to realize that it's an umbrella that all sorts of personality disorders could possibly engage in, an umbrella of behaviors, I guess you could say. But it's not really a syndrome in and of itself. And it's what I call them is conflict junkies.
Yeah.
They're addicted to conflict. And
that could be
a narcissistic personality disorder's person's approach, but it also could be maybe a BPD's or anybody. It could even be somebody who hasn't been diagnosed and they're just addicted to conflict because it makes them feel relevant. And so the thing that I like to tell my viewers now that I finally had all this time to think about it is they put the conflict above everything, including their child and themselves, because they feel like without a conflict, they don't have a sense of self. It's like they're nothing without it. And so the end of the conflict is the end of them. And that's my ultimate understanding of what's wrong with them, is that they can't let it end because then they themselves, and I hope that makes sense to you, but it's really a thing that
makes sense.
Any sort of person could, fall under that.
Yeah. It does. And the hard part is that if you have a child with somebody like that, it even after they reach the age of majority, where you don't have to try to attempt to co-parent with them, they're still going to create situations where there's conflict, graduations, weddings, childbirth, all of those things. I foresee myself being in high conflict for the rest of my life, or until at some point my children maybe say, no, you can't, I can't deal with you anymore, to my ex. So one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of the literature and information that's going on out there about high conflict exes focuses on men as the issue with the bringing the high conflict, as being the narcissist, as being the antisocial. But I think there's a lot of dads out there that deal with this, and it's not as spoken about because of the cultural presumption that women are more caretakers of their children than men.
It's true. They just don't talk about it as much. And there's this attitude that if the mom's taking care of them and they're not dead, then everything's fine. And they just ignore the psychological and emotional torture that the child is subjected to and how damaged the child is going into adulthood. It's sad because it doesn't end when the child turns 18. I can't tell you how many of my viewers thought that.
Right. No, it doesn't because the pressure starts to fall on them from the high conflict parent to start focusing on them. There's no longer a legal protection. Even in the case of your son, her parental rights are terminated, but the minute he turns 18, she can do what she wants to try to waltz back into his life, correct?
She could try, yeah.
She could try, certainly, right? But there's no legal protection there.
Aside from the individual protection, he can actually remember the abuse, so he knows. We try to control the outbursts when he recalls what he went through to the extent that we can. I don't want to go into too much detail. But he, on his own, when he turns 18, can just say, screw you, leave me alone. And I don't have to deal with that issue.
How old is he now?
So now he's 14.
14. Okay. And how long has this been going on? You said a decade?
The termination of parental rights ended the abuse. So it would have been from ages 2 to 6 primarily, with much less from ages 6 to 9, because she had so little contact with him from those ages.
All right.
Gotcha.
That's good.
Gotcha.
And by the way, the TPR did wonders. His grades went up. His social skills went up. Everything turned around, which is actually baffled the psychologist.
Why?
Because he didn't expect that to happen. He didn't tell me why. He just said that this solved the problem.
Well, you would think somebody in a happy situation would be a lot better overall, just in general.
You have to end the abuse. You can't continue. You can't continue. You have to end it. If the child is being subjected to abuse, you have to end it.
Even if a child is not aware enough to understand what they're experiencing is abuse, they know enough to understand that one or both, depending on the situation, the parents are not concerned about their well-being and not giving them what they emotionally need as children to thrive. So it's almost one of the parents is choking off the emotional necessities of them, and the child sees that parent doing everything they can to preserve their own emotional necessities as the parent, which are counterintuitive to what everybody else needs in their emotional life to thrive. So when it comes to, you said a lot of, or most of the people that come to your channel are trying to learn how to win their case. They want to learn from you. So you've got your series on the legal nuts and bolts, and then you have your series on high conflict child custody, and then you've got your My Docket series and things like that. How many people are there just to listen to your story and just to feel like I'm not the only one that's going through this? Because that's really where my mindset is. I'm 6 years into my case, and I've learned a lot of similar things that you have going through pro se representation in North Carolina. The cases are different, but the case law is very similar. A lot of the things that I've had to argue are very similar to things that you've had to argue, but they just come in different orders. How many people are just there going, man, going through the same thing?
All of them. One of the things is they felt like they were alone until they got to the channel. Because they're just... And it's alone in the sense of legal support. And there's other channels that support people emotionally, but they felt like most of my viewers felt like they had an idea that they could do something legally, and then they went to the channel and it was like they had a guide to help with the procedural and legal steps. That's what's lacking. And so that definitely, I didn't have that. And that's actually why I decided to make the channel. I was like, all these terrible things are happening because people just don't know what they can do. People don't know they can just file something in the Supreme Court for free.
Of course.
You know how many people were like, how much did it cost you to win those appeals? They were like saying that to make fun of me because I won these appeals. And I'm like, it didn't cost me anything. And their jaw dropped because they're like, wait, I thought you had to pay like $25,000 to get that attorney fee award of $1,000 reversed. No, I paid a couple of nickels in paper, and it just blows their mind. That's even possible. Like here in Nevada now, we actually had a candidate continue to cite our Nevada judges over and over again, and the judge was ousted. He was a very popular judge, so the website had a definite impact. You're right, though. If it doesn't, ironically, it's not just the elections that concerns them. A lot of the communications that I get from judges on my other organization have to do with their reputation.
Sure.
And so when their colleagues and the law clerks and there's whispers around about error rates and mistakes, that seems to be more harmful or painful to them than the actual election process itself, which surprised me. Yeah. I didn't expect that. Yeah. I thought that they were just going to care about the elections, but no, they're mainly concerned about their reputation being impugned. And so you're right. For some other states, they're going to have to do something similar.
There's nothing like that in North Carolina, and like you mentioned, there's a lot of those. You did an entire video on this. Wing it judges, and they see themselves less. They don't see attorneys as combatants in a legal gladiator fight, more or less. They see them as prejudges, and these judges see themselves as family therapists, and they're not, as opposed to judges who are there to follow the law, and the lawyers there to represent their clients in the most vigorous way they possibly can, which sometimes is unscrupulous.
So
you're
Alex,
right about that. Yeah,
you didn't have any formal legal training. So how was it doing the Supreme Court stuff? The lower court stuff, I guess, from the lower court stuff all the way to Supreme Court stuff. How did that feel like to be able to accomplish something like that you literally didn't have any training in?
You can't
were
describe
just fighting
it in
for your
words.
life. Oh, I bet.
It's one thing to defeat your ex. It's another thing entirely to defeat a judge.
Yeah.
It's just no words to describe it when you get the order reversing. Because then you realize that all the things that person was saying on that particular day was a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, she sat there and lectured me and she was wrong.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
What do you do with that? You're going to court thinking that the judge tells you the law. You don't go into court thinking that there's just a bunch of screw ups there. And it's the sad truth of it. You described it. It's because nobody challenges them. Nobody files appeals. And so they just end up becoming a law unto themselves. And I think that over time, it just evolved into the whole thing about the mini-judge / prejudge thing, where the attorneys are just the prejudges and the judge is just a therapist. And that's also one of the reasons why the other areas of the judiciary and the legal community don't respect family attorneys or family court judges, because they know what you just said. What you just said is pretty accurate with what goes on. And things seem to be changing in Nevada now, because the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court's on a rampage, overturning decisions left and right, like I've never seen before. The numbers for 2019. They're not rubber stamping anything.
Yeah.
They're overturning all kinds of stuff in the family court system, which is a wonderful thing because it's causing corrections.
Absolutely.
It seems like the family court system it's very insular. All of the attorneys know each other in a particular jurisdiction. They all know the judges. They all know that they're going to have to go back in front of judges. So if the judge comes up with something that's off the wall or not supported by any kind of case law, that the attorneys tend to go along with it because they know, okay, I'm going to see that judge later on. I don't want to create a stink for my next client. And I know next time this is how this judge is most likely going to decide. I can go into that case with that knowledge of understanding that it's not the law, it's this judge's preconceived notions about maybe what the law is or just what their preference is when they're dealing with these family cases. So the lawyers don't have there's no incentive for them to fight the judge in any meaningful way.
Yeah, and that's mainly a problem with family court. So in non-family court, the judges don't seem to take it personally. They're appealed all the time, hundreds and hundreds. You should look at the ratio between how often a family court judge is appealed versus a non-family court judge. And so the other judges, oh, I got overturned, it sucks, but they don't take it personally. Family court judges, maybe they do. And so what you describe is a valid concern.
Have you ever considered trying to parlay all this experience that you have into getting into the system? Like being a part of the correction of the system.
Spoken like somebody who hasn't been going through this.
No.
As far as being like getting your law degree, being representation, and
that would be ineffective. It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that going into the system would actually neutralize my ability to help. I'm doing a lot more from outside. I'm on the attorney disciplinary committee. I'm a lay member, so I discipline attorneys now.
Nice.
I'm on the fee dispute committee, so I'm a panelist, so I can overturn the fees that they charge to people. And these are things that I can do as a layperson that I highly doubt they'd let me do as an attorney member.
Yeah, you would have so many restrictions.
Yeah,
if that was the
and
case.
then I'm also with our Nevada judges. I've been able to talk to justices on the Supreme Court. I've been able to talk to the Commission on Judicial Discipline. I've been able to talk to these groups. I've been able to do more from outside than from within. So
Well, here's the other thing, Alex and Clint, that you may not know, is that the advocacy for an attorney is completely different than the advocacy of somebody who's fighting for their own child. So when you're fighting for your own child and the best interest of your child inside of a court system where the other attorney is just fighting for their client, they don't care one iota about what's best for that child, and it becomes this like emotional heartache. So for somebody who's gone through this time again, filing briefs, going into court, having hearings, going into mediation, having these conflicts, to have your heart and just have this high level anxiety and have your heart ripped out and stomped on with decisions that you know are bad, and just continue to fight through this, to go into the system and to be an attorney and just be essentially a law robot for somebody else, and your representation is all about the client who hires you, not the child that's at stake in these family court matters. It would be almost giving up what you've taken on as almost an ethic at this point, right?
You mean for me or
yeah, for you
right.
as going through what you've gone through, to then become an advocate for clients, or advocates for, as you say, best interest of the parent, which is what the attorneys are more or less fighting for.
Yeah, and the attorneys are mainly transactional anyway.
Sure.
So it's a business for them. They're running a business. That's the beginning and the end of it. And they put you on the conveyor belt. So you're going on a conveyor belt and you're going to get fleeced like everyone else, and then they move on to the next case. And that's probably the best that they can do for the most part. Even the judges are very limited in their ability to help because they are busy handling cases on their specific department. So probably the most effective way is, and this is what Judge Judy mentioned on the Norm Macdonald interview, is cameras in the courtroom and exposure to the public of what's going on. And that's what I've been doing with our Nevada judges. So it's the media approach, the press approach, and pointing cameras at them. And it's working. Because there's some judges, you can look at their statistics, and magically, 2020, it's all blue. How could that? Why is that happening all of a sudden in 2020?
Public perception.
You should look at some of the graphs. You'll see the cliff of the correct decisions that are all of a sudden being made. There's no way that's a coincidence.
No way.
Right.
So I'm able to do more from outside than from within.
And unfortunately, in our state here in North Carolina, there are still no cameras allowed in the courtroom. So in fact, in some jurisdictions, they don't even allow you to bring phones into the court because they're afraid that you are going to either audio or with a camera the hearing, and they don't want any part of that. They don't even do their own audio recordings of the hearing. So there's no
just the court stenographer.
There's no stenographer in the courts anymore. No,
really,
no, they don't do that.
Interesting.
You have to pay for it. You have to pay a lot of money. Yeah. You can get it transcribed, but you have to pay. And that's actually one of the things that'll impact an appeal. And if you don't have a transcript, and what's even more alarming is if nobody gets a transcript and you do, you look like the jerk. And I've had that happen to me in a justice court before, because justice courts don't always record. So I went into a summary eviction case, and the judge handled all the cases before me. I was the last one. Everyone was gone. The first thing he said to me is, "Who hired a court reporter?" Those were the first words out of his mouth. So, yeah, there's something to that.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had to pay money for that.
If you don't pay money, you don't get a transcript and you can't appeal. Well, I wonder why they don't like you bringing in a court reporter.
They don't, because then their actions or their words are recorded.
Are you allowed to bring recording devices into Nevada?
I am allowed to because I'm a news reporter, so I have news reporter status. But other people can't. They can't bring in. They can't record. They can't record with their phone or anything. It's against the rules. So I file something called a media request. And then I get that approved, and then I can take cameras in.
Even for your own case?
No, my own case, I got my own jazz videos and published them. So that wasn't me recording. I just downloaded the jazz videos.
And in those cases, the state of Nevada allows recordings, or they were recording?
It's tricky. It's very tricky. So there's local rules that really frown upon it. But I figured my ex's parental rights were terminated, and if they had a problem with it, then I would fight it to the Supreme Court. Somebody did it in Florida, and they won.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Okay. Here's something that you talk about a lot, and I'd like you to share this a little bit for our listeners here. You talk about the perils of being a pro se litigant. Okay, and some of the preferences that are given in courts and how you're looked at as a pro se litigant. So can you talk a little bit about that and how to differentiate yourself from other pro se litigants that maybe are looked down upon?
Yeah, so the judges most of them are annoyed by pro se litigants. They hate them. And there is a bias. I talk about it in the video, self-representation bias. The best way that you can not annoy the judge is to be as different as you possibly can from all the other pro se litigants. And a big step in the right direction is to do your research, is to cite statutes, rules, and case law, to do your research, and to not file things that don't need to be filed. Because the system is created to be as efficient as possible. And so when you are being as obnoxious as possible, it upsets them. It creates more work for them. And that's one of the fundamental things. The only other way you can stand out is to get them overturned. Once you get them overturned, they treat you very differently.
Okay.
They really do. They start reading your stuff. And it's sad that it has to be that way, that they have to basically be practically electrocuted to wake up and look at your case. But that's sometimes what it takes. And that's one of the things that I tell my viewers is you're going to have to learn how to appeal if you're having problems with your judge, because he's had people complain about him all the time. The guy probably has had 1,000 or 2,000 people complain about him in the last, 4 or 5 years. The difference between you and those other people is the Supreme Court said you're right. So when you go into court and you say, I need you to do this for me because the Supreme Court said so, you get treated differently. And that's a step in the right direction. You're still going to have issues. They're still going to be annoyed by you. And that's just nothing you can do about that because you can't afford an attorney. But it'll at least make it so that the bias is less than it would be if you were one of the other people that they just lump into the big ball of annoying, vexatious litigants.
Does the judge get any kind of reprimand if his decision or her decision is overturned, especially in a Supreme Court?
They do in Nevada now, because it shows up. I get emails from judges that are upset about their error rates. So now there's a consequence in Nevada.
That's good.
But anywhere else, they don't really care because nobody knows. So if you're in North Carolina, if a judge got overturned half the time, nobody'd have a clue. Nobody'd know. They'd run for election and they'd probably win. In Nevada, somebody'd go to their profile and they'd see 50% error rate. And it's a problem.
So it's public information in Nevada. It's not public information.
It's public information everywhere, but it's not organized.
Oh, got it.
Right.
Okay.
So, Alex, one of the things I want to go back to that point about annoying the judge or annoying the system. One of the things that you faced is this bias against making too many filings.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
Yeah, so
attorneys do that all the time. Attorneys file stuff all the time. Nothing happens to them. You file stuff all the time, and you're evil.
Yeah.
It's like instantly you must be evil. You're filing too many papers. And that's exactly what they think. And the reason why is because they have this wrong-headed idea that once all the papers stop getting filed, the family's happy. And it's like they can't understand that sometimes people just give up. And the family is not happy, and the child is being abused into oblivion. But there's no papers being filed, so everything must be fine. So that's the beginning and the end of that. It's the most inane thing that I've ever had to deal with. And it is absolutely a factor if you file too many things.
One of the things that your ex's attorney used to do was count the number of filings that you've made and put it right at the front of her response.
That's super
funny.
Like,
look at this guy has made X number of filings. He's obviously obnoxious.
Yeah, that's exactly. And here's what I used to say is that she was conniving and a despicable attorney. But now actually I've changed my tune. The reason she does that is because it works.
Yeah.
The attorneys use what works.
Yeah.
If there is a specific thing that they can do to dupe the judge into committing a mistake, they will do it. Their client doesn't care if the law is applied correctly. Their client wants to win. Yes. People pay their attorneys to win their cases. If their attorney has to break the law to win the case, their client doesn't care. They paid them $5,000 to win, so win. And so the attorneys do that because the judges are easily suckered into thinking that you're just another vexatious litigant. They just look, 80 filings, he must be like the others. And they stop reading.
One of the things, I was listening to one of your videos this morning and started laughing out loud because I got to the one where the judge was filing, and I don't remember the name of the filing, but he was demanding to know who your ghost attorney was.
Oh, the ghost lawyer thing, right. People use ghost lawyers all the time.
Okay.
And usually, it's not allowed.
Okay.
It's against the rules, but here's the thing. Most of the time, the ghost lawyer sucks, and they file crappy stuff. They use paralegals or other amateurs. So the judges don't say anything. Lawyers don't care. Judges don't say anything. Sure. But as soon as you start to win, and I've seen this before in other cases, as soon as you start to file stuff that starts to actually work, all of a sudden they want to know who the ghost lawyer is. Magically, all of a sudden now it matters.
Yeah.
Why? Anyway, I'm telling you, that's another thing that's absolutely, to me, it really damaged my perception of the judiciary to notice that pattern. That they don't care when people use ghost lawyers until they start winning. Then they start caring.
The thing is, you didn't use a ghost
I
lawyer.
didn't use one, by the way, just for the record. It was me. And the clerks all started laughing and calling me the ghost lawyer anytime I came in to file stuff. They loved it.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that you made so many filings and learned so much of the law because you were focused on your specific case. You basically became a self-educated attorney who specialized in your case. And you probably knew the law better than probably 90% of attorneys practicing family law in Nevada at that point.
It's funny you use that percentage because I would imagine that maybe less than 90% of attorneys have even gone to the Supreme Court. So
That's a fair point.
Of course, if you don't go to the Supreme Court, in my opinion, is you're not going to know what you're doing because you just don't know if it's if you don't go to the Supreme Court, how do you know that what you're doing is right? Maybe it's just what your judges want you to do. To them, I don't know about it. I'm obviously right more often than attorneys if I'm getting decisions overturned. That means I'm right than some of the judges too. More right than some of the judges. So that speaks for itself. Is a decision, an order reversing isn't just something saying, hey, you were right. It's also saying, hey, that judge was wrong.
Yeah.
So there's that other side of the coin there.
Well, Alex, you mentioned a number of times you've had 4 cases overturned. You've gone to the Supreme Court. You have a case named after you. What was it like going in front of the Supreme Court? Were you actually arguing your case in front of the panel?
I wish, but they didn't need me to go there. The mistakes that the judges made were so blatant, so obvious, they just mailed me an order. It would have been fun to do oral arguments, and I'm not even sure that Nevada allows you to if you're a non-attorney. I think what they do is they appoint you a free attorney. I've seen self-represented people file stuff that's really close, and so the Supreme Court will send an order to the legal aid clinic to appoint an attorney for oral arguments. I don't think they'll let a non-attorney try that. But in any event, I still won, and it's actually less stressful to just get an order in the mail. To just saying that thing is nonsense, tear it up, throw it away.
But it would have been fun.
Yeah, the cases were slam dunks, though.
Yeah.
They were obvious errors.
Yeah.
So it would have been so easy.
Yeah.
So can you talk about the circumstance that led to your name being on a Supreme Court decision in the state of Nevada? Like, I know that it's a long story that starts with the protection order, the temporary protection order against you.
Yeah, it all started with the protective order that should have never been entered in the first place. Yeah. And what the hearing master decided was that what she was going to do is only enter it for 3 months. I talk about this in the video meta rulings, where they will do something that's not legal, but they don't care. They want to make it so that both sides feel like they got something. Yeah. So they violate the law, but they feel like it's okay because we split the baby and now you both got a little bit of something. She didn't believe my ex, so she gave me a 3-month restraining order.
In that particular case, there was no evidence of domestic violence. She argued potentially that there may be a possibility in the future, and your ex's attorney was friends with the master.
I don't know about the third one. If I said that in the video, then I probably did my research, but I can't remember that now. But I will say that you got the first 2 points correct, and you missed an important point, which is my ex admitted there was no domestic violence at the hearing.
That's a fair point.
She admitted it. Yeah. And the hearing master said, I believe that you might have threatened her. And so since there might possibly be domestic violence someday, we're going to enter it against you. And that's not really the judge's fault because that's the legislature's fault. The legislature created that statute. That's right. The legislature created, and this is what led to the publication. The legislature created a statute that says that you can get a protective order against domestic violence even though you have never committed it. All you have to do is show that there might possibly one day be domestic violence in the future. Now, because there is such a gigantic window of discretion, different judges decide how to interpret that. Some judges want a little bit more, other judges not so much. Yeah. And they entered the order for protection. Unreal. So here's what the judges didn't think. They didn't think that my ex's attorney would exploit a loophole in the statutory scheme to take that protective order and get a confidential address from the confidential address program. This is mainly the fault of the legislature. In Nevada, For whatever reason, the legislature never imagined that somebody might use a confidential address program in a child custody dispute. They never thought somebody might abuse the system. So they created a subsection in those statutes that allows somebody to get a confidential address if they have an order for protection, which she was able to get. So this program is meant for real victims of domestic violence. This is not meant for potential victims. In the program, it says that actual victims are supposed to get the secret address to hide. Right. But they created a statute that they didn't check doesn't match up with that. So I took that to the Supreme Court and they agreed with me that I found a flaw. So the Supreme Court created a mechanism named after me. It's called Falconi v. Secretary of State that you can now use to force a judge to actually do their job and take evidence on the issue.
That's correct.
So as soon as that decision published, I went ahead and did that, and my ex didn't even show up. Right. Because there was nothing there. So then she didn't show up, her fictitious address was canceled, and here we are today.
So there was, and the reason they made that decision is because parents have a 14th Amendment to know where their children reside. Is that correct?
They did mention the Constitution, but they also put more of their attention on the fact that you as a parent are supposed to be able to litigate for the best interest of the child. And if you don't have information like where the child resides, then that is going to impede your ability to do that. Sure. So they did use the Constitution because I do have a fundamental liberty interest, but they focused more on the best interest statute.
That's pretty crazy.
And the interesting thing was at that point, you had joint custody of your son.
Oh, yeah. Clearly, that was fun. That was fun, not knowing where your kid lives, even though you have joint physical custody.
Yeah.
And that's the most ridiculous thing that I can't even get my head around. Stupid. How inane the legislature in Nevada is to not think this through. Yeah. You could have primary physical custody and somebody will have a confidential address.
Unbelievable.
It's the incompetence. It's the more you learn, the more upset you become. Yeah. And ordinary people just don't have a clue. I
am ordinary people in this situation. And I had full custody of my daughter from when she was 16 months old, but I found out my ex-wife now, thank goodness, was cheating on me, and I took her and just left. And she never fought. She never anything. And so it's like I'm on the total opposite end of you guys. And I'm so listening to all this, I'm just thankful that I didn't have to deal with that. I can't even imagine what you guys what y'all are going through.
It's one thing to go through a legal system. It's terrifying for people. It's another thing for the people who are in charge of the legal system to not know how to do their jobs. That is the most terrifying thing, is that you're going to be subjected to a system where people are getting overturned 30% of the time, 40% of the time, which means you're practically at a coin toss that you're even going to get the right decision coming out of there.
And being a dad, everything else goes against you with that too. So
yeah, it does.
Yeah,
in certain states more than others. In Nevada, not as much, but
North Carolina.
Definitely. There's definitely that stigma.
It's supposed to be equal, but there's still a presumption for mothers. Especially there's still a bit judges, even though it's not supposed to be part of the law, they still adhere to the tender age doctrine.
That's a problem with having a weak Supreme Court. I have a lot of viewers from North Carolina, by the way, that are complaining about that problem.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Is that if your Supreme Court and your Court of Appeals does not take control of the family division, you're going to continue to see that kind of abuse. Right. And that's what happened in Nevada. Was they created a few cases and statutes and the judges were ignoring it. So then the Supreme Court published Rivero 2009 and they started to aggressively deal with the problem. And like I was telling you, in 2019, 2020, they were overturning stuff all over the place. More than half the decisions were overturned in the family court.
Sure.
Did your Supreme Court get overturned? When did your Supreme Court decision come down? The last one, I guess. The last of
the most recent one, off the top of my head, I feel like it was 2017.
2017.
This was an award of costs, so the custody stuff was over by then.
Okay.
But it was a cost award that they messed up on.
Nice.
Gotcha.
Okay. When's your movie coming out, Alex? I assume there's got to be one.
Somebody else has to do that. It's not something that I can do. But I'm doing other stuff.
Because I would assume that I've seen movies like this, and there's got to be one because this is all this information is crazy.
It would be really hard to cover a 10-year case because it's such a grind.
Sure.
Right? You keep going back because you get an order, and your ex does something to get around it because they're a high conflict X and they're trying to find out where the loophole is. So you have to go get another order.
Dom, you
and
know
you have to
the
go get
movies
another order.
always shortchange stuff, so they're always going to make things look a lot easier and different than they do normally.
That would not do that would do a disservice to what people are actually going through in reality.
Maybe, but it would still get the word out there a little bit better.
That's true. It could cause a lot of people to watch the movie and then maybe a percentage of those to go and look at the actual channel and get all the details.
How did you end up then getting to the point where you get not only primary custody, but then the termination of your ex's parental rights? How does that come about? Because most states in family law are loath to take away all of a parent's parental rights. They have to do something super egregious to do that.
You're right, and they wouldn't have done that in my case either if they were not forced to.
Okay.
This is why I love plain statutory language. The way to force a court to do what they don't want to do is plain statutory language, and that's what I use to force the TPR to occur. So in Nevada, they noticed that this was a problem, that some judges weren't TPRing parents who abandoned their children. So the legislature created a statute that creates a rebuttable presumption that if a person hasn't seen their child in 6 months, there is a presumption that they've abandoned the child and the court must terminate. So then one of the judges tried to test it out. The Supreme Court said no, reversed it, sent it back with instructions to terminate. And ever since that case published, it's been a lot easier to TPR someone for abandonment. So basically the judges TPR'd my ex because the Supreme Court said so. And that's what it's going to come down to. If the public wants to deal with certain issues in family court, educating the judges isn't going to work. You're going to want them instructed on what to do from the legislature. That's what works.
I don't know in North Carolina if there's any if there's an abandonment clause for terminating parental rights, because the only thing that I could find on that is a situation where you have a natural parent versus a third party, such as a grandparent or somebody else like that. If the parent does not act in accordance with the way a natural parent would act, so they abandon the child or something like that to the care of a grandparent, then in a custody situation, then their presumption of parental rights becomes waived, and then it becomes an issue of child's best interest.
Yeah, sounds like you're talking about the parental preference presumption.
Yeah.
But you could use that in Nevada too if you want to. The parental preference presumption allows non-parents to get custody, or it's one of the things that shields a parent from losing custody to non-parents. And you can do that in Nevada too, but the TPR is more effective because it's permanent.
What I'm saying is that I don't think in North Carolina, at least that I've found in case law so far, there's a way to terminate a natural parent's parental rights so long as they want to continue to remain in a child's life.
You're probably right, because under the Constitution that makes sense. In Nevada, they had to create a statute. So the termination of parental rights process is a creature of statute.
Yeah.
So it's a mechanism that was created by law. The only reason we have it is because the legislature said so. These are hard lessons that we all probably should start learning, is that you're going to get things to occur the way that they need to occur because the legislature says so or because the Supreme Court says so. And the sooner we get behind, that's where the actual power to change things is. But if you don't have a TPR statutory scheme in North Carolina, then you can't TPR a parent.
Sure, and there's a great place for people to go who are arguing cases in Nevada to go to your channel and to learn more about the specific statutes in Nevada. And people can still go to your channel if they're arguing one of these high conflict custody cases in other states, but those states have their own specific case law and statutes.
Right.
Where can somebody go to find the specific case law and the specific statutes in their state? How do you discover that? Attorneys have LexisNexis, they have everything else. Well, what do you use?
So in Nevada, I used Google to find a lot of the stuff. And different states may not be available to you. So we have the rules of civil procedure on the legislature's website. We have the revised statutes also on the legislature's website. And then we have case law on Google Scholar, which isn't the best. It's better to use Westlaw. But the other states, you're going to have to track that stuff down. You're going to have to find all the statutes, all the rules, all the case law, and then possibly the administrative code, which is going to be in big states like New York and California. Those are the things that control the outcomes to the cases. And then you probably, like North Carolina, from what I've heard from viewers in your state, is there's discretionary windows that are so colossal there that there's almost nothing that you can do until the legislature sits down and closes those windows.
The legislature in our state is not interested in doing much of anything right now. I can assure you that.
And over here, they weren't interested either. And then there was basically not riots, but like angry people. And that led to the presumption of joint physical custody. And that also led to the clear and convincing evidence standard for domestic violence. So I guess people in Nevada get angrier and things happen in response to that. But
it's like the Wild West out there.
We're also the divorce state. So it's interesting that being the divorce state also means maybe we're the tip of the spear on some of these issues with child custody and divorce.
Yeah.
It feels like that. I mean, the more I learn about... Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just said that they go hand in hand, I assume.
Yeah.
Because one leads to the other most of the time.
So, Alex, what can concerned parents, especially parents that are going through cases like this, do to help educate judges, attorneys, other parents, just get the word out there about how to deal with high conflict exes, high conflict cases, and get the legal system to understand that not everybody is going into the legal system to agree about things, and some people are using it as a nuclear option, almost as a weapon to destroy their former partner.
So there's no way you're going to be able to explain that to an attorney. They just plain won't listen to you. If they tell you that they're just lying. I'm sorry to have to say that, but no. You cannot sit down with your attorney and try and educate them on these issues. If they believe them on their own because they've come to those conclusions, and that's good, you should probably hire them. But if they don't, then you're not going to get anywhere with that attorney. The judges, you're not speaking their language. The judges respond to the use of legal force.
Yeah.
They are not going to listen to you trying to educate them on high conflict child custody. They are going to listen to you abuse your discretion. It is overturned. Here are the instructions of what you should have done. The judge will listen to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and they will do what they're told from the appellate courts. They won't listen to you like that. So to communicate with the judge, you're going to have to use statutes, rules, and case law and armor yourself for an appeal and communicate with them in the language that they understand, which is an order reversing. The ordinary people would probably be the better thing to try and communicate to, create groups, and especially if you have rich members that can lobby. Because rich people, they can lobby, and that's where the change occurs. The legislature can change the statutes. They can close discretionary windows. They can force things to occur. Or they can at least empower the Supreme Court to do things. Because if there's too much discretion, then the Supreme Court really can't help you much. But if the legislature closes some of those discretionary windows and creates some statutory language, now the Supreme Court in your state can actually do something. And then last but not least, you're going to want oversight. So an organization that can point cameras at them. And that would involve changing the statutes and rules to allow recording of those types of cases with some limits. And that's maybe another discussion. But
So, quick question. If, let's say, so this is the Nevada Supreme Court, correct? So Dominic couldn't cite something from one of your cases in his case, or
he could. It's called persuasive authority. They don't have to follow it.
Okay.
It's persuasive authority. Your own state is better. That's mandatory. So if you cite a case from Maryland and the judge doesn't listen, you can get it overturned.
Okay.
If you cite it in Nevada, they can decide to adopt it if they want to, but they don't have to.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Alice, we're coming to the end of our hour here. Is there anything else or specific that you haven't spoken about that you would like to communicate to parents going through one of these high conflict child custody cases? Like one piece of advice that you think is invaluable that you'd want to convey to them, or at least something that could help comfort them through this process?
Yeah, I think the one invaluable piece of advice is think of it this way. If you're not paying thousands and thousands of dollars to an attorney, then you have to accept this idea that you're going to have to pay time. You're going to have to pay in time. A lot of people shoot themselves in the foot because they're like, I can't afford an attorney. I'm too poor. But then they don't put any time into it. They just walk into court and start talking. And just think of it that way. If you're not going to pay $25,000 to a lawyer, maybe put 25 hours into learning how it works. And it makes a difference. So that's what I would say. You're going to pay either in time or money. But you can't go in there with this attitude that I'm not going to spend any money and I'm not going to put any time into it. I'm just going to talk.
That's great.
Because that's where you just set yourself up to. I hope that is more helpful to people than scary, because it's uncomfortable to have to do boring stuff. It's not fun. The law's it's pretty boring. It's fun to win,
Yeah.
but
To be honest with you, it's actually fun to learn
Sure.
about some of these things and realize,
good.
oh my God, the case law is actually on my side in addition to being right on the facts. Holy crap! That's where it gets exciting when you've done enough research to realize that.
And it's also scary to spend $25,000.
Yes. It's a fair
For
point.
sure, for sure. Like,
it's a lot of money.
I would be more uncomfortable doing that than spending 25 hours learning something, for sure.
Alex,
You
we
know,
want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Very-
We really appreciate this. It's
been
fascinating. And can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Okay, so theproperperson.com. So that's theproperperson.com, just as it's spelled. That's one site. And then the other one is Our Nevada Judges. Same thing. It's just common spelling for each word. Our Nevada Judges.
And the proper person on YouTube as well. Is it the same?
Same thing.
The same. Okay.
Yep, same
Okay.
thing. And
Any
the
social,
web.
any social
Go ahead.
media, LinkedIn, Twitter,
Yeah,
Instagram?
Facebook has only Our Nevada Judges is on Facebook. Twitter also only Our Nevada Judges. So yeah, the proper person is just the website and the YouTube.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent. Alex, thank you very much.
Congratulations, by
Yeah,
the way.
congratulations on winning your
Yeah,
case
and
on
fighting
winning-
the good fight,
Yeah,
for sure.
we really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
You're doing a lot of good things
Yes.
for a lot of people that need help,
Yep.
for sure. For Clint and I, this is the Liquid Soapbox
Yeah, man.
podcast. You can find us on social media at Liquid Soapbox, Liquid Soapbox Pod. You can find you can email us at liquidsoapboxpod@gmail.com, and liquidsoapbox.com is where you can find us. We're also on Apple
Stitcher,
Podcasts,
Spotify,
Spotify, Google, all the normal
all of the
places.
things.
So
You good?
Hey, everybody. Thank you
All right.
very, very
Thank
much.
you again, Alex. This has been enlightening.
Thank you.